So, we're all feeling it, right? I'm talking about how we experience movies and TV shows. It's just seemed off for a while. Like maybe you're not even really watching anything besides a few popular series, or maybe some interesting things from your favorite niche production company. You might instead be finding that you're scrolling on TikTok and just watching YouTube nowadays. And maybe you haven't quite been able to put your finger on it yet, but you're getting this encroaching feeling like the way that we watch movies and TV shows is about to have this big, massive change. Between streaming fatigue, skyrocketing subscription prices, Netflix canceling shows after one season, and actors and writers still not getting paid what they deserve, Hollywood is a mess right now, and it can be tough to pinpoint exactly what these problems are and where they're coming from. I myself have been a voice actor for almost 30 years now, and I've been working in entertainment as a performer and actor for pretty much my entire life. My very first gig was actually modeling for a print ad for a local company for baby blankets when I was 6 months old. And I've worked in theater, commercials, print, and independent film productions in San Diego and LA for also pretty much my entire life. And I've always worked pretty locally and small but consistently until I decided to go full-time in my mid-20s. And the reason I'm sharing all of this is because it does mean I have a little bit of an insider's perspective into what's going on right now. So today I'm going to go on a deep dive of why I personally think Hollywood is about to be completely different from anything we've ever seen before, and why it will no longer be our primary source of entertainment. Once upon a time, we all thought that streaming services were going to save us from the evil clutches of the cable companies. With high prices, too many commercials, and hundreds of channels that nobody asked for, cable was the bad guy. Then Netflix came along for just $8 a month, and it evolved from a company that rented out DVDs via snail mail into a huge production and streaming company. And it gave us not only the ability to stream some of our very favorite shows and movies, but it also gave us really amazing original content. Now, in the early days of Netflix, they operated primarily as a distributor. That's why it had such a massive library of movies and TV shows. Studios would license their content to Netflix for a fee, and that allowed Netflix to stream those movies and TV shows for us to watch. And it was a win-win situation. Studios earned money from their back catalog, and Netflix built its reputation as the go-to service for on-demand content. But all of that changed for a few reasons. As streaming services became more profitable, major studios decided to launch their own platforms, like Disney+, HBO Max, Paramount+, and Peacock. These companies realized that instead of licensing their content to Netflix, they could create their own services and make way more money by streaming their content directly. That's why Disney pulled its movies and TV shows from Netflix, so they could launch Disney+. The idea was to force viewers to subscribe to multiple platforms in order to access all of these different movies and TV shows. For instance, Warner Media reclaimed Friends for HBO Max, and NBC Universal took The Office back for Peacock. So now this exclusivity of content means that you can only watch these movies and TV shows on their respective platforms. This is a big change from the early days when Netflix had all of these different movies and TV shows from different production companies. That's why Netflix started focusing on producing their own shows and movies to make up for this loss of licensed content. Series like Stranger Things, The Crown, and The Witcher are all examples of this. Netflix is trying to fill in the gap that they lost with all those licensed shows. And that's why today you'll see fewer third-party titles on the platform. Netflix has gone from being a distributor to an actual production company. Now, as streaming services have gotten more competitive, the fees for licensing have skyrocketed. So now it's just too expensive for Netflix to even pay to license these new TV shows and movies. That means as the viewer today, you're paying for a subscription service that might look something like this. And that's not even counting Crunchyroll, YouTube Premium, Apple TV, Shudder, and like 10 other platforms. So at about $80 a month, this has actually led a lot of people to say they might as well just get cable at this point with how much they're paying for all these subscription services. But here's the thing about cable. Besides not being able to watch whatever you want, whenever you want, it still has commercials. From my understanding, commercial breaks happen every 6 to 8 minutes in a 30-minute TV show on cable TV. And this pattern is pretty standard across all networks, though depending on their audiences and sponsorships, some networks might have slightly different structures. For example, it's pretty common for a show to run 7 to 8 minutes before the first commercial break. And then it'll have 2 more commercial breaks spaced about 6 minutes apart. Then the last segment wraps up after a final commercial break of between 2 and 4 minutes long. Now, supposedly this is designed specifically to retain viewer engagement while maximizing ad revenue profit. The idea is to balance content and ads in a way that encourages the viewer to actually sit through the commercials and not channel surf. That's why a lot of networks have actually synchronized their commercial timing. That's also the reason that I know that young people, or relatively young people, don't actually have cable anymore. If you're under the age of 40, you have the attention span of a gnat and you have zero patience for commercials. And part of the reason I think this happened is because commercials haven't been good in years. I know, I'm sure that the phrase good commercial probably sounds like an oxymoron, but genuinely, we used to have really fun commercials. There was the Swiffer wet mop.
I got a delivery from a Mr. Mop.
Baby, come back.
These absolutely unhinged Skittles and Quiznos commercials.
Tim, show Joel how everything you touch turns into Skittles.
That's awesome.
Is it awesome? Well, you can't hold your newborn baby boy in your arms. Did you feed and dress yourself this morning? I didn't. I met a man on the bus today. I shook his hand. He'll never see his family again. I guess that's pretty awesome. Excuse me.
Touch the rainbow. Taste the rainbow.
We love these subs. 'Cause they are toasty subs.
And whatever was happening with this snowman here.
Nesty cool. Cool to the core.
And today, I think that advertisers are so hell-bent on being relatable and genuine that they've actually forgotten to be entertaining. That's why the best and most effective marketing I've seen in years hasn't actually been on cable TV commercials. It's been from the Duolingo and Nutter Butter TikTok accounts. But all of that aside, there's also just the frequency of commercials in cable TV. I tried to watch the original Roswell on Hulu last month, and the amount and frequency of commercials was so egregious it actually made me upgrade my account to premium. But even if everyone did upgrade to a premium account, I'm not sure that that would solve the problem. That's because commercials are actually a huge part of revenue generation, and it's why actors used to get paid really well for syndication. If you're unfamiliar, syndication is the practice of selling those broadcasting rights to multiple different stations. This allows them to air the show without being affiliated with the network. Actors would get paid more for syndicated TV shows because they would receive something called residuals. Residuals are a payment on top of that actor's original fee for just performing in the show that are paid every time that show airs on a network. That means they can earn more money long after the show's initial run, as long as it's staying popular. And the way that networks generate revenue to fund these residuals is through ads and commercials. So every time an episode airs again, the network earns money from those commercials that are showed during that TV show. The more times an episode airs, the more ad revenue it generates. And that means more residuals for the actors, writers, and crew. But Netflix doesn't generate revenue that way. Netflix generates revenue through subscriptions, not through ad sales during those particular TV shows. And this subscription-based model has actually made it really difficult to implement any kind of residual system, according to them. They say there's no direct way to be able to tell how much of a show's continued viewership results in new subscriptions. But even on the streaming services where there are ads, there's no requirement for these platforms to pay those residuals to actors, writers, and crew. This is because of the difference in how content is made and distributed on streaming platforms versus traditional TV cable. Now, this happened for a few reasons, but one of the big reasons is because of outdated union contracts. When streaming first became popular, it was viewed as this big new experimental thing that didn't have quite the same reach as traditional TV cable. So the unions didn't initially negotiate the same kind of residual structure for streaming platforms. This left everyone with smaller flat fees instead of ongoing payments. And today, streaming services will argue that they're just not working with the same kind of financial model in order to be able to pay those kind of residuals. But the thing is, the streaming service and executives have been raking in an ungodly amount of money, while the people that are actually working on these productions aren't even earning enough to cover their basic living expenses. And that's one of the reasons why, besides the implementation of AI, we've been seeing all of these strikes. So, What's the solution? I personally think that restructuring residual payments for streaming content by introducing a system that ties payment more closely to a show's or movie's success on streaming platforms would be incredibly effective. That's because it would ensure that actors, writers, and crew receive a percentage of streaming profits similar to traditional syndication residuals. Minimum guaranteed payouts for creators based on viewership metrics, similar to how broadcast TV compensates for re-airings, should also be established. And more contracts should be negotiated by unions like WGA. And SAG-AFTRA should incorporate streaming-specific residuals, setting fairer baselines for pay across different platforms. And as for low wages and difficult working conditions, especially for crew members and support staff, unions could push for stricter protections on working hours, breaks, and fair wages for all workers involved in productions. This could include living wage mandates for workers, such as editors, set designers, and production assistants, and implementing a cap on hours to protect workers from overwork and burnout, and ensure they have livable working conditions. So to sum it all up, the differences in how content is aired and monetized, along with outdated contracts and flat fee structures, have allowed streaming platforms to avoid paying actors and crew the same residuals they would receive on traditional TV networks. The reliance on ad revenue is a huge reason workers were paid better during syndication. Network TV could afford to pay higher residuals because each airing generated new ad income, which isn't the case in the new subscription-based streaming world. That's why many actors and unions are pushing for a new model of compensation in the streaming era, where the lack of ad revenue has led to lower payouts for the same amount of work. So does this mean we just have to suck it up and deal with a painful amount of commercials? Maybe. And look, I'm never one to defend huge billion-dollar companies, especially when the CEO of Netflix made $49.8 million in 2023. Nobody needs that much money for any reason. And a lot of these problems could be solved by simply redistributing that wealth just a little more evenly. That all being said, I think commercials could be a lot more effective and less painful if they were distributed in a way that was unique to streaming services and very different than what we're used to on cable. I don't think there's any reason that viewers wouldn't be able to customize their ad experience on a streaming service. For instance, an ad for Hims would be of zero interest to me, but I would love to hear about products that I think my dog would love, especially if they're really targeted towards an 8-pound Chihuahua mix with a ton of health issues that are slowly depleting my savings account. With the level of targeted marketing that simply isn't possible on cable, advertisers should be charged a much higher premium for the kind of reach and targeted advertising that they could get. And likewise, smaller businesses could take advantage of local targeted advertising at an affordable rate. Or, some people could be okay with making just a little less money and living like kings instead of gods. I also can't help but wonder if implementing these kind of models would have any effect on shows getting canceled after one season. Ever since Stranger Things, that kind of viewership and cultural phenomenon is now the standard of any show if it wants to get renewed, and it has to happen immediately. I'm sure I don't need to give you a lesson in probability for you to understand why wanting your average to always be above average is mathematically impossible. Expecting overnight success is also just really dismissive of how we connect to stories as humans. It often takes time to build attachment to characters, and it takes time to build a good story. While there are instant connections in life, most relationships take time to build, regardless if they're real or fictional. And that understanding has just been really lost in this corporate model that demands overnight success. This model is also enraging viewers. They feel like they can't get invested in a show because there's no guarantee that there will be any kind of conclusion. I have seen so many people say that they're just not going to start up a new show until they know that it's going to be renewed. And that has to be bad news in the long term for these streaming services. In addition to just abruptly canceling shows, there's also a major problem when it comes to how short series have become, and how much time there is in between the release dates of seasons. For instance, the original Gilmore Girls had an average of 22 episodes a season with a runtime of 44 minutes, and each of its 7 seasons was consistently released every single year in the fall. But when it comes to content produced by streaming services, we see an average of 8 to 13 episodes per season. Now, part of this is due to higher production values and more intricate storytelling, which often takes more time and resources per episode. Shorter seasons allow creators to focus on delivering high-quality, tightly written content without the filler episodes that sometimes pad out longer network TV seasons. But in my opinion, one of the biggest reasons that we are seeing shorter seasons and bigger gaps in between those seasons is for subscriber retention. There are several major examples of this, with Netflix spacing out the release of its seasons on shows like Stranger Things, Emily in Paris, and Bridgerton, and Disney Plus is using a similar strategy with The Mandalorian, and Amazon Prime is doing the same with The Boys. And what's really wild is this still isn't even the most egregious thing I think that we're seeing coming out of these production companies. Studios are getting into the habit of making entire movies and not releasing them. Warner Brothers made both a Batgirl movie and a Wile E. Coyote movie and have just shelved them. You cannot see these fully completed movies, and it's very likely that you never will. A lot of people speculate that the reason that they're doing this is because somebody at the studio decided that these movies were going to flop at the box office, and they'd rather take the tax write-off from choosing to leave those movies unreleased. But something's still not adding up because Wile E. Coyote did really well with test audiences. Something weird is going on there in my opinion. Studios are now more risk-averse than they've ever been in recent memory. And yes, while Hollywood has always been a business with a list of problems about 10 miles long, a lot of us witnessed a time in previous decades when studios were a lot more willing to take risks and allow for this creative exploration that we're just not really seeing today. Studios used to be on the hunt for the next cool original thing, not the same recycled, safe story from the same tired IP that's guaranteed to bring in burned out adults who are on the hunt for euphoric nostalgia. Both the audience and the creatives behind movies and TV shows are getting really sick of Hollywood, and I think it's actually a good thing. More and more people are turning to YouTube and TikTok because it's providing something that the studios simply refuse to. One of the biggest draws is consistency. Creators on these platforms release new content constantly, some even daily. And the creativity and quality is just as, if not better, than what we're seeing from these big-time production studios. There's one creator specifically on TikTok who has built this entire universe around this actor called Paloma Diamond. And another creator has made a one-man sitcom called Bistro Buddy, and both of these series are some of the best I've seen all year. There's also been this huge boom of indie animators on YouTube who are just completely bypassing the traditional Hollywood system. Platforms like this one allow animators to create content through ads, sponsorships, and crowdfunding. There are often no middleman and no executives calling the shots, resulting in the type of creative freedom that is producing amazing shows that likely wouldn't exist otherwise. I think we're going to see a kind of dismantling of the Hollywood system as we know it. I don't think Hollywood is going to continue to be the powerhouse it's always been. Like, Gen Z isn't really watching movies or TV at all. Jeff Sagansky, the co-founder of Equal Equity Partners, recently said at a conference that the lack of interest in TV is a tsunami that threatens entertainment's entire model, because Gen Z is watching historically low levels of television. Only 17% of their entertainment time is spent watching TV. And when Gen Z stops buying 4 streaming subscriptions, you're going to start to see a business stop growing, and it's going to begin to shrink, and investors will immediately crush the entire stocks of the streaming sector. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen. The consequence will be that Hollywood will put out a very small amount of high-production movies and shows a year, and it will be creators on TikTok and YouTube that will be responsible for what I would call the modern-day weekly series schedule. I also think we're in the middle of a huge indie renaissance that's going to be ushered in by YouTube, not unlike what we saw in the 2000s, with movies like Wrist Cutters, Napoleon Dynamite, The Chum Scrubber, Once, Primer, Thumbsucker, and Junebug, just to name a few. In fact, I think we're kind of already there. Like, for example, a lot of us love Dune and we went to see it in the theater and it was this huge cultural phenomenon. But for a lot of people, it was one of, if not the only movie that they did see in theaters that year. When we're hanging out with friends or working out, we're watching our favorite creators on YouTube and their weekly or daily releases. And if we can use effective, interesting, targeted advertising on YouTube and TikTok, these creators can earn a fair wage. And you can still have the option to pay a premium subscription fee to bypass all those commercials and have access to literally any content at any time. So what do you think? Are we headed towards an era of really amazing indie content? Or is Hollywood going to figure out a way to solve its problems? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you liked this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And I'll see you next time. Extra special thanks to TawnyVoice.com members who make videos like this possible.